Force field analysis, understanding the pressures for and against change. The force field analysis is a useful technique for looking at all the factors for and against the decision, a plan, or course of action. In effect, it is a specialized method of weighing pros and cons. By carrying out the analysis, you can plan to strengthen the factors supporting a decision, a plan, or course of action, and reduce the impact of opposition to it. The force field analysis was developed by Kurt Lewin, a German-born psychologist and one of the modern pioneers of social organizational applied psychology. He was one of the first researchers to study group dynamics in organizational development. He began his work in pre-World War II Germany and worked with psychologists of the Gestalt school. When Hitler came to power in 1933, Lewin worked at the London Tavistock Institute and then later immigrated to America. He worked at Cornell University, the University of Iowa, and MIT, where he would become director of the Center for Group Dynamics. While there, Lewin set up a workshop to find an effective way to combat religious and racial prejudices, which laid the foundations for what is now known as sensitivity training. In 1947, this led to Lewin's establishment of the National Training Laboratories at Bethel, Maine, shortly before his death. Borrowing a concept from physics called quasi-stationary equilibrium, Lewin noted that the perceived status quo in life is just that, a perception. He viewed organizations as systems in which the present situation was not a static pattern, but a dynamic balance of forces working in opposite directions. These two opposing forces are 1. Those factors seeking to promote change, the driving forces, and 2. Those factors attempting to maintain the status quo, which he called the restraining forces. In order for any change to occur, the driving forces must exceed the restraining forces, thus shifting the equilibrium. These organizational forces or factors can be persons, habits, customs, policies, procedures, or attitudes that both drive and restrain change. The force field analysis, then, is a method for listing, discussing, and evaluating the various forces for and against a proposed change. When a change is planned, a force field analysis helps you look at the big picture by analyzing all of the forces impacting the change and weighing the pros and cons. You can then develop strategies to reduce the impact of opposing restraining forces and strengthen the supporting driving forces. Using this tool is a two-step process. First, a force field analysis is conducted, and then the intensity of a force or set of forces is either increased or decreased. Change can be fostered by adding to or increasing the intensity of the driving forces, or change can be fostered by diminishing the opposing or restraining forces. Lewin's change theory predicts that the better of these two choices is to reduce the intensity of the restraining forces, because by adding forces or increasing the intensity on the driving side, a simultaneous increase would occur on the restraining side, and the overall tension for the system, whether it's a person, a group, or an organization, would intensify. The equilibrium would stay intact, and the status quo would persevere. This idea, too, he borrowed from the physical sciences, as it was Newton who stated, with his third law of motion, to every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. The better choice, then, according to Lewin, is to reduce the restraining forces. So if you want change to happen in a system, don't try to force it into being. Rather, reduce the power and influence of those factors which resist it from happening. So how do you use the force field analysis tool? First, on this template, describe your plan or proposal for change in the middle. Secondly, list all the forces for change in the left column and all the forces against change in the right column. Then assign a score to each force, with 1 being the weakest and 5 the strongest. For example, imagine that you are a manager deciding whether to install new manufacturing equipment in your factory. You might draw up a force field analysis like the one in Figure 1. Once you have carried out an analysis, you can decide whether your project is viable. In the example in Figure 1, you might initially question whether it is worth going ahead with the plan. Where you've already decided to carry out a project, The force field analysis can help you to work out how to improve its probability of success. Here you have two choices. One, to reduce the strength of the forces opposing a project, the restraining forces, or two, to increase the forces pushing a project, the driving forces. As Lewin indicated, often the most elegant solution is the first, because just trying to force change through may cause its own problems. People can be uncooperative if change is forced on them. Going back to the example in Figure 1, if you had to implement a project to install new machinery, the force field analysis might suggest a number of changes to the initial plan. For example, by training staff, you could eliminate some of the fear of technology. Or you might show staff how change is necessary for business survival. Or you could show staff how new machines would introduce variety and interest to their jobs. Or you could raise wages to reflect new productivity. Or you could install slightly different machines with filters to eliminate pollution. These changes could swing the balance from against the plan to being in favor of the plan.